Good morning, everyone. My name is Clara Hemphill. I'm the interim director of the Center for New York City Affairs at the New School. Thank you all for coming this morning. The Center for New York City Affairs takes a look at fixable problems in city government and then works with city government to fix them. This event today is part of our series looking at the de Blasio administration, how it's doing in several key areas, and this morning we're going to look at juvenile justice. The Center for New York City Affairs is part of the Milano School of International Affairs, Management and Urban Policy, where we teach students to combine theory and practice and go out to work in city government and nonprofit organizations. If you're interested in becoming a student, we have admissions material on the table outside. And now I'm going to introduce Abigail Kramer, who is our moderator and associate director of Child Welfare Watch. Abigail.
Thanks, Clara. Thanks, Jeremy. So I am not going to stand up here for very long. I'm going to get out of the way very quickly. But there are a few people I want to make sure to thank, starting with Jackie Wayans and the events team who makes these forums look so smooth and easy. Nicole Mader, who I'm not sure if she's here, but she crunched a lot of data and made these incredible visuals that I'm going to try not to mess up on PowerPoint. The foundations whose long-term support makes so many of these events possible, including the Prospect Hill Foundation and the Ira DeCamp Foundation. And I want to give a special shout out to Miles Jackson and Mina Sabraha and the team at Good Shepherd Services, who has been so generous with their time and their labor and helping me learn about what they do. So we're here to talk about the city's Close to Home initiative, which officially came to be in September of 2012. The big vision, the grand shift of Close to Home was that the city would stop sending at least some of the kids who landed in its juvenile justice system to upstate facilities, which were often hundreds of miles from their families and their communities, and which had long and storied histories of abuses and chronically high recidivism rates. Instead, the city would work with social service providers to open residences here within or just outside city limits. So in the last 2.5 years, the city has, in fact, opened a network of small juvenile justice residences, usually holding about 6 to 12 kids who can be as young as 12 years old, usually for about 6 or 7 months, sometimes as long as a year. The kids are technically considered by judges to be low risk on the sort of spectrum of risk to communities, and the facilities that have been opened so far are called non-secure placement facilities. What's coming next, what's in the works coming soon, is also a network of what will be called limited secure placement facilities for kids who are considered to be the next step up the risk ladder. So we're going to talk today about what's happening with the system, what we know about how well it's working, what the plans are for the near future. We are fortunate to have with us Felipe Franco, the Deputy Commissioner for the Division of Youth and Family Justice at the Administration for Children's Services. He's going to give a brief presentation on the system, which is under his supervision. After that, I very much hope we are going to hear from a young woman named Rianne Bryan, who is a former resident of a few of the city's non-secure placement homes and who's doing some really remarkable things with her time now. And then we have a panel full of remarkably smart and interesting people. So it should be a great 2 hours. Deputy Commissioner Franco, mic is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It's actually good to see a lot of friendly faces that I haven't seen in a while. It's good to be in New York City. I think I'm going to keep it really short. I mean, it's important to keep in mind what Close to Home was meant to be. It wasn't a reform effort. I kind of was engaged in doing reform while I was at OCFS under Commissioner Carrion. That's usually when you're trying to tinker, improve a system. Close to Home actually was a big vision. It was about building something completely new and having an opportunity to do it how we will do it for our kids if we had a chance to develop a system from scratch. So close to home, in a way, kind of feels like this table. Is actually small settings where actually kids and staff are in very intimate relationships. You know, if you go to any of the homes, and you know, they usually, as you heard before, 6 to 12 kids. You wake up in the morning, it feels like a home, you have to prepare to go to school, you have to work out things with other kids of your same age. You actually have to figure out a way of sharing and problem solving together. Staff actually has to work with the kids consistently. That's not what correctional systems tend to do. Most correctional systems are built on large facilities where actually you can make time. You can actually be there for a certain amount of time, stay out of trouble, make your time, do your time like kids used to talk about, and go out. In a close-to-home setting on a typical day, again, you're going to have to wake up, prepare for school, be transported to a school that is run by the Department of Education, be together with 6 kids and a very small group of staff, and try to develop those skills and competencies that you need to be able to connect to others when you go home. So that's what we intended structurally to do. We are so close to home, so that actually provides a unique opportunity to do the work that we should be all striving, how to make those relationships, or sometimes mend the relationships between the families and the young people that we work, and more importantly, figure out a way of creating a network of long-lasting support relationships in the neighborhoods they come back to. I think there are going to be some slides about data. Kids don't come from everywhere in the city. We were working mainly with 6 neighborhoods in the city, and I think if Close to Home really moved to take advantage of its promise, will move from a paradigm of working with kids and families to a paradigm of working with communities. And that's what actually our commissioner wants to do. We have 30 residents in non-secure placement, some of the best providers in New York City, folks who have been doing some of this work for hundreds of years with disconnected New York City children. When they raised their hand and decided that they wanted to be part of the Close to Home and the juvenile justice disruption or transformation, they came with their experience, their expertise, but also they went out of their way to work with the national experts in each one of them. So as we meet and talk in the panel, you will learn how each one of these providers is actually building on the best knowledge and evidence-based practices that we have nationally. And there's actually a plethora of programs that we work closely with. I think New York City wasn't shy of going and getting advice from Washington State or Missouri or Omaha when necessary. We have capacity for 245 kids. We don't have 245 kids today, we have less than that. One of the things that I'm excited to report on, and we're looking forward to do our second report, is that actually the number of placement and intakes have gone down. Many of us were concerned that actually having Close to Home, this new shiny new program may have led to more placements. It hasn't. I mean, the ever shrinking New York City juvenile justice system continues to do what they have been doing. More and more kids continue to be supported in the community, and I think hopefully that trend will not change. School is essential to Close to Home. Historically, we had young people go far away from their homes to schools that were not connected or aligned to the work that happens in New York City Department of Education. Many of the young people that we work with, when we meet them, have been out of school for a long time. They have long histories of absenteeism and lack of connection to the Department of Education. The Department of Education has been a fantastic partner, and looking at Sam and other folks here, they have actually gone out of their way to think differently about how education is provided to juvenile delinquents. We have come up with really new ways of thinking about opportunities to allow young people to recover credits and actually move forward. I mean, things as experiences with Carnegie Hall that actually are credit-bearing, experiences in terms of community services that are becoming credit-bearing. We are figuring out more and more ways of making them make up some of the challenges they had before. Again, close to home is a work in progress. I mean, I feel like we're still under implementation phase. We're working very hard to develop the right metrics to look at our success. In a way, fantastic that Jeff is here, because I think we have an opportunity not just to do the work differently, but actually how to measure that work differently. We shouldn't just do what we have historically done in juvenile justice and kind of measure the lack of success or actually the lack of failure with recidivism. I think we have a unique opportunity to look at successes and look at actually achievements of our kids in terms of close to home. As you heard before, Limited Secure is our next endeavor. We were hoping to be open by March. I could report that we are not. We're working really hard to be open by the summer of 2015. We have encountered challenges in construction and other issues that actually have delayed a little bit of our opening. But in a way, I think have provided a unique opportunity. When you talk to the providers, we actually have had a chance to recruit some of the best professionals we can for Limited Secure. Many of them are on board. Many of them are actually beginning to work and be trained as teams. And something that I think we learn in non-secure, but also is unique to our business, is not just about how competent are you as an individual, it's your ability to work together as a team. So that tempo and unique way of working together is something now our providers at Limited Secure are being able to build by having shadowing, mentoring, and other kind of experiences for the staff that is on board. I think when you think about close to home and think about our work at ACS, don't just think about residential care. I mean, we continue to strive to invest as much as we can in closing the front door of placement. We continue to work closely with our partners in probation to figure out the ability to fine-tune or expand alternatives to placement whenever possible, and actually how to really create a more strategic way of thinking about risk, strength, and responsiveness when we meet with kids and do assessments. We have in the past few months done some new work. The most recent is a recent RFP for what we call youth community services. It's the first time that ACS invests $9 million, $3 million per year to develop a cadre of community providers in 10 communities. And these are actually non-traditional child welfare or juvenile justice providers. These actually are cultural institutions, positive youth development programs that are going to create the network of support our young people need when they come home. We have been working very closely with our partners at DYCD, and actually soon there will be an RFP of using a positive youth development after-school paradigm to our work in close to home, while in detention and in placement. And I think that's where we are at. We're looking forward to hearing from you and talking to you about close to home and our work in ACS. Thank you.
So this is Rianne Bryan. She is 15 years old. She is currently a junior at the Restart Academy and also completing a series of very impressive internships. She is a former resident of a few of the city's non-secure placement facilities, and she has generously agreed to talk not only about her own experience, but about her opinions about the program. So Rianne, let's start with what you're doing now. Tell us how you're spending your time. Tell us about school, work.
Right now, I'm in 10th grade. I'm currently in Kids Restart Academy.
You speak a little more into it.
I'm in 10th grade. I'm in Kids Restart Academy. Right now, I go to Carnegie Hall every Saturday for the vocal training classes they have. Also in Exalt, which is it's an internship program. They helped me get an internship. My internship is at Criminal Justice Initiative, and they help with looking for ATIs, alternatives to incarceration, and I help them with looking for different programs and setting up media and stuff like that.
How did you get involved in Carnegie Hall, and what are you doing there?
When I got discharged from Shirley Chisholm, Good Shepherd Services, they helped me get into that, and I go there every other Saturday for the vocal training classes they have.
And we talked a little bit about your goals for the future and what you want to be in the future. Will you talk a little bit about that?
I want to be a FBI profiler.
What does an FBI profiler do, and why?
Well, I want to be that because I'm very interested in the criminal justice system, and I feel like that helped me understand the way why people do things, and that's something I really look forward to doing.
So let's talk a little bit about your time in the non-secure placement system. If you can share whatever you feel comfortable with how you ended up in the system. Let's start there.
I ended up in the system where me and my mom was having trouble at home, and I ran away. I was constantly running away, and one time they couldn't take it. The police literally said they couldn't take it no more. So I got arrested, and I was charged with criminal mischief because I tried to get back inside my house. So that was not charged. I got it at home.
So there were a series of calls to the police, and then eventually there was a charge of criminal mischief after a number of calls. And then when you first went to court, what was the judge's decision?
When I first went to court, I was put in Quest. It was alternative incarceration. It's a program. I was supposed to go there every day during the week. But that didn't work out because I was still breaking the curfew. So I was put in another one. I can't remember the name right now, but before I got sentenced to placement, I was in 3 alternatives to incarceration, ATI.
And they all didn't work out?
No.
And was it all the same reason?
Yeah, curfew.
Okay. So you were violating curfew, and so you weren't meeting the terms of the alternatives to incarceration programs. And so then what happened?
Then I got placed 12 months into NSP.
Okay. And once you were placed, you kind of did the grand tour of NSP programs, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the different placements and why you moved between them?
First, I was placed into NSD because you have to wait around 2 weeks to go to NSP to get placed. So I was in Outreach and Shepherd, and another Good Shepherd house. It was called Sharp. And then from there, I went to Boys Town, and I ended up having a physical altercation inside in Boys Town, so they transferred me. I went to Good Shepherd Services. My mom felt like it wasn't a good fit, so I went to New York Foundland. From New York Foundland, I went to SCO, Shepherd Avenue. I hurt my wrist there, so they transferred me to SCO 49th Street. And there was a problem about food there. So I got sent back to Good Shepherd Services, and that's where I got discharged from.
So how much time did you spend altogether?
12 months. I got extended. I was supposed to do 12 months, but I got extended 18 months because I did my whole 12 months inside of the placements.
So you were supposed to do 12 months including placement and aftercare, and then it ended up being 12 months in placement and 6 months of aftercare.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about, in particular, Shirley Chisholm, since that's where you spent the most time. Tell us a little bit about your experience there. What was bad? What was good? What do you make of that experience?
There's a lot of good times I could say that I had in Shirley Chisholm, and the most I will always remember is the support that you have. It's I feel like in Shirley Chisholm, the support I had there, out of all the placements I've been to, it was the best because I went through a lot of deaths in my family, and I was able to connect with certain staff. I was able to, if I had, I was able to tell them what I needed, and I got help with that. And the only thing I could really say was bad about it was the number of kids there, dealing with different personalities. And again, in the Missouri rule, we have to move as a group, and everybody has to pick everything together. That was probably the only thing. But other than that, the support and everything was great.
So I would guess that the people running the programs would say you having to move as a group and really deal with these other young people, that's the point. That's supposed to be what's good about it. But you would identify that as the hardest thing about it?
Yeah. Because there's a lot of times where you would have problems with other kids inside there, and to move as a group, they would do, we have to pick choices together, sometimes pick TV shows together, and because me and another kid, for example, would have a problem, they wouldn't want to watch the same thing I would watch, and that would be the problem. So, like, that's just an example of how, like.
And so tell us more about your relationships with the staff, which you identify as sort of the best thing, and tell us more about the relationships you developed there. How were they there for you?
I remember one time, like, I had the staff, her name was Miss Cardine, and my aunt passed away, and the first person, when they told me that, when my mom called and she told me, the first person I ran to was her, and I hugged her and I started crying. And I remember going into the room, and we talked about it, and it happened to be that she had the same experience I had. So it was like a connection where it was like, you know what I'm feeling, and I know what you're feeling, so it was easier to talk to her. It was a lot of things that, it was like, it was another staff, and he would know when I was getting to a certain point where he would have to take me out of the room, talk to me, and it's so much names that, like, I can't even say them. It just, if one person's not there, because of course they're not there all the time, it's different shifts, but if one person's not there, another person's there, and it's just like they were all there. So.
How do you think you changed in your 12 months?
I feel like I'm more calm now. I feel like I'm able to talk for myself. I don't know. I just feel more like mature in a way.
I mean, I find it so interesting. Is you talk about, I mean, this is not a place you chose to go to,
no.
Right? But you talk about it in such a positive way.
I mean, the program rules, that was probably the hardest thing, like, and the personalities, of course, because the rules is what the program has to go by. And a lot of times I would get mad at staff because but after a while I realized it's not the staff that made the rules. So it's like, I can't really get mad at them. That's why I said the best part about being in Shirley Chisholm was the staff. Because even though they had rules there, they would help me to understand why there were rules there and help me understand to go by the rules. So.
Do you think you needed to be removed from the community, removed from your home?
Now, at first I wouldn't have felt like that, but now I see the change and I see what mistakes I made in the past and what caused me to go there, and I felt like I wouldn't have made it as far as I did now if I would have just stayed at home.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I'm in my normal time, I'm a reporter, and I am so impressed by people who are willing to share of their own experiences and their own lives. I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of generosity. So I really appreciate your time here. Rianne's going to come back towards the end of the event. We're going to open up for audience questions, and Rianne's going to come back and join the panel in case people have more questions. Thank you. Okay. Dr. Butts, Mr. Feynman, Dr. Roman, you guys exist once again. Terrific. Can we give one more round of applause for Rianne? Because I think she's phenomenal. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and call up the rest of our esteemed panel. Go ahead, and the table's a little bit of a squeeze, but please kind of come on up and grab your places. We have with us today Dr. Jeffrey Butts, who is the director of the Research and Evaluation Center at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Do we have further? No. Terrific. We have Martin Feynman, who is the attorney in charge of the Juvenile Rights Practice Brooklyn office at the Legal Aid Society. You've already met Deputy Commissioner Franco. We have Dr. Jeremy Cahoman, who is the president and CEO of the Children's Village. And we will, some point in the very near future, have Edward Fabian, who is the Assistant Vice President of Adolescent Residential Care at Sheltering Arms Children and Family Services. So I am going to give each of the panelists just a brief couple of minutes to introduce themselves and to talk about how their work relates to the Close to Home system. And Dr. Butts, why don't we start with you and then go down the line.
So I'm Jeffrey Butts, and I direct the Research and Evaluation Center at John Jay College here in New York. And I have been working on youth justice issues for a long time, more than 3 decades. And we received a small grant from the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation with a few extra dollars from the Pinkerton Foundation to look into the issue of close to home and to basically investigate that question. Why did we do it? How's it working? What do people think about close to home? And the report from that project is on our website. If you go to John Jay and search for close to home, or the Research and Evaluation Center, you can find it. The main report is called Staying Connected.
Marty Feynman, an attorney with the Legal Aid Society, in charge at this time of the Juvenile Rights Practice Office in Brooklyn. Legal Aid has different practice areas. I've been involved with the Juvenile Rights Practice and also the Criminal Defense Division for about equal periods of time over the last 28 or 29 years. My close to home is a subject that's near and dear to all of us at Legal Aid, especially in the juvenile rights practice and the criminal defense practice, because it's our clients who are the subject of close to home. And it's our clients who we are advocating on behalf of to try and make sure that their cases are resolved in the best way possible for them. And close to home, as far as we're concerned, is a dramatic step forward from the kinds of placements that have existed in the past. So this is a topic that is critical to us.
Good morning. I'm Jeremy Cahoman. At the Children's Village, we have been involved in juvenile justice work for quite a number of years. We were involved in the advocacy leading up to close to home, worked closely with Commissioner Carrion when she was at OCFS and worked with our commissioners in New York City. And since the passage of close to home and phase 1, which is non-secure placement, we have in our custody young boys and girls who are considered specialized. So these are the young people with co-occurring substance abuse issues, problematic sexual behavior, and a combination of other so-called treatment needs in our custody. We have a number of facilities, including a small campus on Staten Island.
Great, thanks. And thank you all for being here. I've spent a significant amount of time talking to all of you, and I'm really impressed with the body of knowledge we have sitting at this table. Dr. Coleman, I want to start with you, because I would love for us to get a sense just of what these programs actually look like. What do the buildings look like? What does a day look like? And what are your goals for the young people who are spending time in them?
So the programs are very different to the ones that Associate Commissioner Franco helped us shut down upstate. They are typically small. In our case, most of our programs are about 9 children, in some cases even less. The weekdays are structured around an education program with credits in a regular school. The evenings have recreation, homework, try to build in some free time to make sure that kids are not over-programmed. A lot of our work, I think, outside the day-to-day structure is focused on making sure we understand the family or the place of belonging. When we think of the one thing that works with children and what we see working with children is that if a child has no place to belong and no place to go, then the opportunity to succeed in close to home or whatever program you're in diminishes rapidly, because kids need to have hope. They need to have something to look forward to. So the bulk of our work And I think that really heavy lift that we have is who is the family? If the family doesn't exist or if the family is unable, can we find someone who will give this child a place of belonging? And when we mean belonging, we simply mean one capable, willing adult relationship. And that's, once that's secure, I think our opportunity for success grows exponentially. That's not always clear when children come into our custody.
And can you talk a little bit about specifically the model that Children's Village uses?
We use, we have an evidence-based model that comes out of Seattle, Washington, with Dr. Eric Truppen, who is a New Yorker who has done a lot of good work around juvenile justice. It's very focused on interpersonal interactions, and so the treatment modality is called DBT, but it's really about helping kids, young people be mindful, live in the moment, hear, listen, interact, and it's a model that is heavily weighted to staff behavior. So this is not about, you know, when you're in our custody, you're a young person, you got to play by our rules. That's not the model. The model is staff leadership, staff engagement, staff willingness to struggle with difficult issues with young people, staff responsiveness, and the type of response. It's a model that actually Commissioner Felipe Franco introduced us to, and we are in the first, I'd say, 14 months of rollout. It's a model that's not new to us. We've done it before in community, so, and it's very promising.
Terrific. When Mr. Fabian gets here, I will throw that question back at him because the programs are using somewhat different models, treatment models, to work with kids. So I want to talk about the young people who are in the homes, and I have these really, really great-looking graphics, and I've never used PowerPoint before, so I'm terrified. So ACS reports on the zip codes that kids come from who are ending up in the non-secure placement homes. There's only publicly available data for zip codes from which 6 or more kids come. So what we did is we took those zip codes and we imposed them on a map of New York City. And this is probably unsurprising to most people in the room, but it turns out that the kids who are ending up in the system are heavily concentrated from a very small number of neighborhoods. You can see them there on the map. So we took some census data from those zip code tracks. And again, perhaps unsurprisingly, you find that most of these neighborhoods have very high poverty rates. So we're looking up at the Bronx. We've got 35% of people in families below poverty. They are majority Black and Latino neighborhoods, 88% up in the Bronx. And they have a very heavy concentration of close-to-home placements. In a couple weeks on our website, we'll have a tool so you can roll over all of the zip codes and get that data. But I think it's just really important to acknowledge at this point that we're talking about a system still that is made up of kids from a very small number of neighborhoods that meet a pretty specific demographic. The other demographics that we're looking at, again, unsurprisingly, so the two pie charts are looking at young people who were admitted to close-to-home non-secure placement residences in fiscal year 14. You can see that it's 56% African American, 28% Hispanic. Systems was about a quarter female, 3/4 male. And then you can see the ages. There's a spike last year in placements of 15-year-olds is sort of the heaviest concentration. The year before that, it's 16-year-olds, I'm guessing because of the transfers from OCFS, young people had already spent time. Not sure, just guessing. But so I think it's important, I want to keep in mind those sort of demographic realities. I want to come back to those in a second. But look at the other piece of demographics that ACS publishes, which is the top charges leading to close-to-home non-secure placements. So as you can see, violation of probation is by far the biggest one. After that, we've got robbery, we've got assault, we've got weapons charges, and then we go on down the list. So it's really hard. I know when I was looking at these numbers, it was hard for me to know what it means. You know, so if we're talking about assault, Are we talking about two teenagers got in a fight and one of them's mom pressed charges? Are we talking about a much more serious violation than that? Are we talking about a fight inside a family's home? So, Mr. Feynman, I was wondering if you could break that down for us. You represent a lot of these young people. What is this? What's the range? What are we actually looking at, the stories that get people into these homes?
The range, it's an extraordinary range. I mean, it encompasses a wide range of behaviors. Assault, for instance, may very often be a family offense. It may be an assault between siblings, maybe allegations of an assault on a parent or another relative in the home, and by assault it could be something as simple as a fight between siblings. Assault may also reflect, the assault charges, you know, on the chart may also reflect something much more serious than that. Bear in mind that there are different, as with all different sections in the penal law, which the Family Court Act Article 3 applies, there are different ranges of each offense. So there's an assault in the first degree, assault in the second, assault in the third degree, different levels of seriousness. And I don't think that your chart breaks those down exactly, so it's very difficult to say, you know, just by referencing an assault, what the seriousness of the offense is as far as the penal law is concerned, and what the underlying nature of the offense is, whether it is a family offense or whether it is an offense between the child who's alleged to have committed the assault and someone outside the family. But certainly very often, the assault cases that come through our system are family related. And the other charges, you know, I don't know if you want to comment on a lot of the other, you know, I think you said probation, violations of probation are at the top of the list there. And violations of probation run an extraordinary range of conduct. And it really depends to a certain extent on the conditions that have been set for probation and the reactiveness of both the bench, the judge that's handling a particular VOP case, and the petitioner, which is Corporation Counsel's Office, which is also involved in the violations of probation. Some individuals are much more aggressive about treating violations of probation than others are. Some are less tolerant than others are. Violation of probation, depending on the conditions of probation, could simply mean breaking curfew. It could mean not going to school. It could mean a variety of other kinds of behaviors that are not criminal by nature, but that address the conditions of the probation that were originally set. And to whatever, and then it depends on if there's a finding that a youth is engaged in any of those alleged behaviors that give rise to the violation of probation, then the issue becomes, well, how significant is that, and does that justify violating the probation and placing the child in some place like close to home.
So you sort of just segued to the big picture question I'm trying to get to, and I want to, Dr. Butts, I'm really interested in hearing your opinion on this one, and I also want to open it up to the panel. So the city has shrunk the number of kids that it is sending to placement enormously over the last 12 years, really. And my question is it small enough? Have we gotten down to a population of kids who need to be removed from homes and communities? Is that the goal? Have we gotten close?
So you use an action verb which said the city has reduced. And I know we like to think of ourselves as having accomplished something, but crime has fallen around the country by more than half in the last 20 years. So the pressures on the system are greatly reduced. And I and some of my colleagues who have been working on this for a long time were very anxious about the falling crime rate because we kept thinking what will happen is the bed counts will come down, people's revenues will start to fall, everyone will panic, and we'll start lowering the threshold for placement. And if you look at the national numbers, we did a little study at my center on this a couple years ago, you do see some of that. That the overall probability of being removed from your home, given your involvement in the justice system, is not that different than it was 20 years ago. So if you draw that as a probability line from 1995 to 2015, the chances of being removed from the home, given an arrest, given a charge, given an adjudication, those lines are actually kind of flat for the last 20 years. So it's not like we've changed the way we respond to these problems dramatically. What's happened is the pressures on the front door have gone down a lot, and so we've had a moment where we could be a little more creative in how we respond to these things. We dress up this whole system in the language of corrections and law enforcement by calling people offenders and offenses and violations, but it's really a child welfare system with some extra power behind it. When you look at, you don't really know who the kids are involved in the justice system if you're just looking at tables and charts, because we use all those approved labels for their offense. You don't really know what's going on until you, one, actually read the details of how they got involved in the system, where they came from, what their history is, and you don't really understand until you go past the file and actually talk to that young person. And I would challenge any of you to get to know a young person that's involved in the justice system, and 98 times out of 100, you'll fall in love with them as a kid. You want to take them home. You want to get them into a good school. You want to help them. They're kids. I mean, most of us in this field, when you start talking, the adults that work in this field, I got involved in juvenile justice, spending my high school years smoking weed and skipping school and trying to avoid the police. But I had some assets. I was a pink American. I had a vocabulary. I knew when to turn on the Eddie Haskell routine when I got stopped. I had those assets and those skills that allowed me to survive adolescence. The only guaranteed evidence-based program we have for young people is called maturity. By the time you're 25, 30 years old, you've kind of figured out what you're doing. And a very, very small percentage of problematic 12-year-olds will turn into problematic 30-year-olds. Very small percentage. So the main job of this system should be not to screw up the kid's future while we're helping him or her get through adolescence. So, so the question is it small enough? Have we reduced the bed count enough? If it was your kid, you would wait until the very, very last second to remove them from the home, well, unless you've just had it and you don't know what to do anymore and don't know where to turn. So it could always get smaller. The real question is, are we using placement when at the very last resort for any case? And I think this reform has made that more possible. So we're still getting over the 19th century conception that the solution to all these problems is get the kid out of the city and send them out to the country where they'll breathe fresh air and learn how to live a rural life. That literally is why we had all these facilities upstate. We are now, I think, finally seeing past that. And now we're trying to build a quality system within the city that does not instinctively place, but works on prevention systems and school engagement and labor force, teach a kid how to have a job, and none of that's possible when the kid's 6 hours away from home. Mm-hmm. So in that way, it's getting smaller, and that's good. Whether it's small enough and if we have too many beds is a whole other question.
Yeah. Okay. And I think one point that is, as a clinician or in mental health or even juvenile justice, there's almost nothing that cannot be done in the community that has to be done in a facility. So we truly do believe that. There's some kids who may have to go away for a little bit, and sometimes that's an opportunity to develop some structure and predictability. But the real work is about creating that structure and the predictability in psychology, in the home and in the community that we're talking about. So, everything that we do in Close to Home or everything that we're doing in this administration is about thinking about Close to Home as an opportunity, but we really want to use it to build more of the capacity of the community and the family. A lot of the work that Jeremy is doing is actually really interesting because it's not just about developing mindfulness on the kids and developing those self-regulation skills, which we're trying to do in Serious Village, but it's actually having someone to go and coach the parent in developing those skills. And I think that's where we need to go. A lot of the work that the providers here do, and I think they're doing more of it as we speak, of connecting kids to Carnegie Hall and to long-lasting support relationships, is what we know is going to make a difference. Structure is something, or predictability, or the well behavior that we want in our kids, my kids, and the kids that we work with, is something that comes within, and we can teach that. But it's also something that comes from relationships, and we need to build those meaningful relationships that support our young people. That's what you had, and kept you at least out of the sight of the police back in the West Coast.
I just said to Jeffrey, he sounds like a legal aid lawyer. And if I was the attorney in charge of not just the borough office, but of the entire practice, I'd offer him his position right now. I really, I second everything that he said. There's a few things that I think are worth saying in response to your question, Abigail. Number one, we do still place too many kids, as far as I'm concerned. There's just no question about that. We do place too many kids. It's great that so many of them that are being placed with close to home, as opposed to in ridiculous upstate facilities, but we're still placing too many kids. And a part of that has to do with the fact that we as a system and as a society haven't let go of what Jeffrey was referring to more articulately than I'm sure I will right now when I try and repeat it, but we haven't let go of that instinctive reaction to just, there's a problem, get them out, send them off. There are too many people that still respond from that kind of mindset, and we're not done with that, and we need to be, and when we are, we will place fewer kids. Close to home also doesn't exist in a vacuum, obviously. At the same time that close to home, and actually prior to the beginning of close to home, what's also been occurring is that there have been more community-based programs like JJI and Esperanza, and I'm sure there are some others that I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head, that are working more intensively with youth in the community and with youth and their families to keep them in the community, which has been critical. That's all a part of the big picture of building community for kids and having an opportunity to keep them to whatever extent possible in their communities, because there isn't really that much that is available in placement for a child that can't be made available for them at home. It's just a function of our being able, or taking the time and having the resources, develop those resources to enable that to happen in the community and at home, rather than have to send them somewhere else, even if it is a place that's so much better than the places that have existed in the past.
Go for it.
So I agree with everything that's said. Just to add a nuance to this, the numbers are still way too high. And they're way too high because they're disproportionate, right? These are not, so the two groups that we don't see in the system, and we don't need to increase them, but we don't see them in the system, is whites and Asians. And that's a good place to look at. So you have a baseline when you look at white teenagers and Asian teenagers, which we have a lot of in New York City. They're just in different neighborhoods. So in the neighborhoods where our children get picked up, 2/3 of the children last year in close to home had a child welfare history. I mean, you heard it from this young lady here. Her case was a child welfare case. So somehow, when it comes to African American families in the majority, and to a great extent, increasingly great extent, Hispanic families who are poor, things go from need and poverty and child welfare need to criminal justice involvement and police involvement very quickly. So things that get resolved in different ways for Asian families and white families just don't seem to be happening for these families in these few communities where our kids come from. And that problem isn't going away, because and we have officers in these communities, when I go into these communities, clearly the segregation is even greater today, right, than it was. So they're predominantly black and brown, and the biggest business in these communities are child welfare, government, and charitable institutions, including legal aid. We are the biggest work in these communities. There is no employment, there is no good employment. Many of the schools are failing. I mean, you look at the school failing list, it's stunning. So we have a problem. And the problem is not just bringing the numbers down to comparable rates with white and Asian children, so that we don't get tied up in the implicit bias of thinking that if a black kid does the same thing that my child does, that the black kid needs to be arrested and put at Children's Village. But we also need to build the institutions in these communities so that a generation from now, if we don't have the right people, I mean, we have been very fortunate in New York for the last 14 years. We've had great leadership, right? Under Mayor Bloomberg, we had John Mattingly, we had Commissioner Carrion up at OCFS. We've had people like Felipe Franco, we had Larry Bushing, we had Vinnie Schiraldi. We all fought to make good things happen. But we need to get beyond good people to good systems. And I worry that if we don't fix the institutional problems in these few neighborhoods, that one day something could happen, we may not have the thoughtful leadership and things will bounce back to what they were in the 70s.
So I definitely want to circle back to that conversation, but first I want to welcome Edward Fabian, the Assistant Vice President of Adolescent Residential Care at Sheltering Arms Children and Family Services, who made a fashionable entrance. I'm so glad that you're here.
So, you know, I read that email wrong. It says 63rd and 5th, so of course I went to 63rd and 5th.
Oh, yeah, that would be 63.
So I apologize.
No, I'm thrilled that you're here. Do you want to take a minute to talk about the Sheltering Arms programs that you oversee? So maybe the number of residences and sort of what they look like and who you're serving.
Well, at Sheltering Arms, formerly ESS, Episcopal Social Services, we currently have 36 beds in the Bronx, non-secure placements. We had the first resident in close to home. Female that came, and it was very interesting, very challenging, needless to say. But it's been work, you know. It's been a challenge for all the providers. You know, it's been a huge transition and adjustment for the kids, the young adults coming from OCFS to New York City. One of our kids, one of our young adults, once they made it there, they said, wait a minute, this is close to home. And they're used to being in an open setting, you know, a campus-like, and, you know, now you're restricted to a building. So they had a hard time adjusting to the fact that it didn't look like close to home because they were more confined and didn't quite understand that they were closer to their families. So, but, you know, today it's thriving. The young people are doing excellent, you know, especially transitioning back to their communities. I think this was a huge step for the city and the state, you know, bringing these kids closer. It's been amazing. It's been amazing, and good work for Sheltering Arms.
Can you talk a little bit about the day-to-day work you're doing with the young people, the treatment model that you're using?
Absolutely. So at Sheltering Arms, how a day looks. Well, we are utilizing the Missouri approach, and, you know, everything is set in expectations. So every day, you know, we set expectations and the goals for the day. Consistency is something that we strive for. We're talking about young adults who didn't eat breakfast at appropriate time, didn't eat dinner at appropriate time, you know, didn't go to bed. That was our huge struggle. You know, when we're telling a kid who's been running the streets till 4 or 5 in the morning that lights out is 9 o'clock. You know, dinner time is 6 o'clock. So those are the things we struggle with. But, you know, setting expectations, getting them to school on time. I think that was one of our challenges. Because if you stay up all night, you're not getting up at, you know, 6 o'clock for, you know, to prepare for school. You know, but education is one of the, we try to, you know, one of our strengths, you know, because most of our kids are developmentally behind credit-wise. You know, some of our teenagers come in, you know, they haven't been to school in 3-4 years, don't have any credits. So, you know, as Jeremy said earlier, it's a struggle when you're in a impoverished community and you have no credits, you have nothing to look forward to. So, you know, crime, you know, you look for a fast way out, and, you know, a lot of our young people are misguided and, you know, follow just a wrong crowd, you know, but we try to instill consistency in what we do on a day-to-day basis. You know, no today means no tomorrow, the next day. And I mean, it's hard for a teenager. I mean, when we were all teenagers at one point, right? Rules and regs, you know, that was something we fought against. And teaching these kids, you know, just, you know, understanding, you know, the developmental stages that they've missed. You know, we take tying your shoelaces, you know, as a simple task. Trust and believe. There's quite a few of our young adults that struggle with that. You know, hygiene. I mean, the list goes on and on. But, you know, what we do is we try to instill consistency, making sure that, you know, the kids are, and also the staff is emulating behaviors, you know, positive role models, you know, especially young, you know, black males. You know, they don't see a lot of positive role models. You know, they look at rappers, they look at, sports entertainment people, but, a guy that comes to work every day, just a regular Joe Schmo, just coming to teach you the basics of life, and supporting your cause and understanding, your struggles and what's out there, we've started to create, young men, young boys.
Thank you. So I want to tie those two things together, right? So I know that a lot of the sort of day-to-day foci of the programs are working with young people, working with families to really sort of increase self-awareness, increase function, to set those examples. I know there's a lot of therapeutic intervention, either in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy or arts therapy. How do you think about those objectives and also sort of grapple with these more structural realities that play a huge role in kids landing in the system, like aggressive policing in their neighborhoods, failing schools? I mean, how do you sort of prepare kids to deal with those realities in terms of staying out of the system in the future? And I'm going to leave that wide open. Anybody who wants to take it.
I want to build on what Fabian was talking about, because I think you did a good job of talking about what close to home at the end of the day. It's about the staff. And again, we could have intervention, we could have evidence-based programs, and again, I mentioned that a few times. We're using functional family therapy, and multisystemic therapy, the Missouri model, the Boys Town approach, the FIT approach. But I mean, all of these things are going to be pending on the ability of getting good people, which actually now really look like the folks that we work with. I mean, many of the young staff that I meet, and they're fantastic. I mean, it's a tough job. I mean, you're away from your family in the middle of the night dealing with a kid who doesn't want to go to bed, when in reality you may want to be with your kid trying to get him to bed. But these folks, they buy into it and they believe in our kids. And I think it's that hope that they have, because they made it. I mean, they finally have a job. That is actually the kind of an intangible element of close to home. And that cannot be, I'm looking at Rose now, who is our union leader in my security detention, and we forget about that. Again, at the end of the day, there's something to get out, is that we're going to be as good as the staff that we have, and these providers and our staff in detention are just great people who made it out of these same communities, and they believe in these kids.
So I think it's a tough issue, right? So when kids are arrested and brought into the system, wherever they're brought in, what you see is that moment of arrest. I mean, that's the thing you focus on, because we have a responsibility to public safety, no question about that. It doesn't matter what we think about the reasons. Of course, Tammy Steckler and her group will call us and probably tell us or say that's not the reason, there were other things. But regardless of that, I mean, the responsibility we have at that moment is be responsive to what happened, be responsive to what the judge said, and that's our first mandate. But that mandate is an easy one to meet. The more difficult question is the one you asked. How do we get kids to think beyond the circumstances that they are well aware of, right? My black boys know what it means to be a black man. They do. We just don't want to talk about it, because I think we think if we talk about it, we give credence to the fact that the world that they are growing up in is inherently weighted against them. But we think of it differently. We think that if you want to deal with social injustice, you need to at least talk about it. Our young boys understand what social injustice is all about. They really do. And they need to, I mean, our message to them is very clear. We can't promise you that we're going to eradicate the kind of injustice that you are reading about, that you're seeing, that you're going to experience. But we can teach you how to survive it. We can absolutely teach you how to survive it. Now, in many of our families, in all of our families, I think we've learned survival skills. Regardless of your color, we've all learned survival skills. Families of color talk about survival in very different ways. They do. And we think in our institutions, certainly at Children's Village, we talk about racial injustice all the time. We are still incredibly optimistic. I mean, I think the United States is the greatest place I could ever live. I could not, I've lived in many other places. There is no other place I'd ever want to live. But I also don't want to lie about what our kids face. With our girls, and I don't work as closely with the girls as some of our staff who are here do, I hear the story. It's a story of pain. I mean, girls don't feel the same sense of despondency that our boys feel about being black or brown, but girls have incredible pain, often tied to being sexually assaulted in and out of the system, or being taken advantage of, both in and out of the system. And dealing with that pain right up front and saying, you know, we know that sometimes being in the system, even being at Children's Village, doesn't guarantee that bad things won't happen to you. I think that's on tape. So you'll probably pull me in on that. No, it doesn't. That's a reality. That's a reality. And I think when I know that we see great results when kids come to terms with that. When they realize that, hey, you know what? I'm not crazy for thinking like this. These people around me tell me that this is the reality. So they begin to chart a future, being aware of what's happening around them. And you know, this is a country where great things happen, and when kids are optimistic, they can overcome a lot of the institutional barriers.
You know, let me just, race is so inherent in what you were just saying, and you touched on race before, and this system is, the system that our kids are involved in is such a inherently racist system. And the message that you're giving them is it's a critical message to recognize social injustice and to recognize what they suffer from. Part of the problem with that is that it's one thing to say that to a kid once the kid is in placement, but for that to seep in, for them to appreciate that, for them to be able to do something with that when they've just been put through a system that has gotten them to placement that is so inherently unfair, that is so inherently racist, where the numbers are so disproportionate. It's a tough one, and I think that you know, giving the message that you're talking about giving to that population is a critical message. But I think that we need to do more, you know, at the front door about shifting the system so that it isn't so disproportionate, so disproportionately weighted against children of color and to the communities that children of color come from. And that's, you know, that's bigger than close to home, although close to home obviously plays a role in addressing that.
Do you have something burning? Go for it.
No. I was just, socioeconomics, you know, we've gotten quite a few kids, you know, that came into the system that, you know, when you looked at what they were arrested for, you know, they were alternative programs to placement, you know, and the system is absolutely designed for them to fail. You know, once they walk through the courts process, you know, it's very hard, especially when you live below the poverty level. And, you know, one of the things we try to stress, and with our residents, females and males, is, you know, learning how to be respectful, you know, once you're approached, you know, not involving yourself, how to handle yourself, how to walk down the street, you know, something simple as a New York State ID. You know, if you don't have an ID, you know, the cops are arresting our kids, you know, for the littlest things, you know, and we try to look at the littlest things that, you know, that they can get through, but it's really hard. We can give them all the tools, you know, teach them everything, but we're putting them right back in the same community. So that's a challenge in itself. You know, if you don't see a way to get out, you know, and we're putting you right back in, you know, that's a challenge in itself. And I think that's something we're looking forward to future-wise, is the aftercare portion of it, of, you know, how to strengthen that. So,
thank you. I want to talk a little bit about assessment. How do we think about whether this system is working? Deputy Commissioner Franco, I'd love to hear your perspective on just where we are right now with thinking through assessment and evaluation of programs. And then, Dr. Butts, you have done the only independent assessment of the system that I know of. So I'd love to hear your perspective on what information is available and what questions we should be asking. But maybe let's start with you, Deputy Commissioner, to talk about where we are with thinking about assessment and what we are asking.
So if you think about research, I mean, close to home is still under implementation. We haven't opened the second phase of it. I think our focus should be in actually making sure that we are doing what we intended to do, and we're spending more and more time looking at issues of fidelity. Working with experts like Eric, and looking at how the potential intervention is being implemented as intended in Children's Village, the same with the folks in Missouri, the same with the folks in Boys Town. And there's work to be done. I mean, it's a new system where actually we have staff that are beginning to learn the skills. They're not learning immediately. So once the individual people know how to do it, I mean, Jeremy can talk about chain analysis and mindfulness. Those things are not just a set of tools that you take out of your pocket. I mean, it actually has to be shown and demonstrated. Actually, staff has to buy into it. It's actually about creating a culture of support. I mean, if you go to any of the programs that Fabian runs, they have actually really bought into the group process, which I think we heard from the young lady that could be sometimes kind of overwhelming because you have to kind of be with a group and process things with that group all the time. But some of the programs are beginning to move beyond that. I mean, you, Fabian, actually a great example of how you guys understood that a lot of the work is not just about the group process, but actually about finding that spark. And you guys have done particularly very interesting work around the use of arts to connect to that trauma and hurt that Jeremy was talking about. So a lot of the programs are just building that. My focus has been, and the Commissioner's focus has been, on how we make sure that what we intended to do is done well. You're going to be significant investments in training and capacity building, not just within the provider community, but also within our staff. And really kind of focus on the process. Are we doing what we need to do as intended to do it before we start talking about outcomes? Having said that, there's things that we want to keep an eye on. I mean, safety is essential. I mean, young people should be safe with us. So we pay particular attention at, are we keeping them? Are we keeping them out of trouble? Are we keeping them safe in the sites? And we're going to be reporting on that soon. Movements, I mean, we open up with a young lady talking about having been in multiple places. That's not a good thing. I mean, maybe it took a little bit of movement before she found the right spot to be. But if we really believe that our work is about building a relationship of trust where young people can try to do things differently, we need to stick to them. And actually, we're keeping track of that, and we're doing much better than ever before. There's less movements in the system than at the beginning. People used to pay a lot of attention to AWOLs. I mean, those are very, very low. Family engagement, Jeremy talked about the importance of having a family to go back to. More than 97% of the kids are going back to their families. That's a good thing. Home visits, I mean, are kind of a good barometer of knowing if actually we're connecting to those families in a meaningful way before they really return home, and those numbers are going better. And then I think I open up saying that close to home should be doing really, really well, but should not actually open up the doors to have more kids placed. And actually those things are not happening. We actually have a reduction in placements from the first year, and a reduction in movements. And I think the next step is start looking at things beyond recidivism. I think people like Jeff and others are going to help us figure out how we measure success. Academic recovery, credit recovery is something that we're beginning to track and is going very well. So those young people who have been without going to school for a couple of years are actually making up significant gains because of their own effort. We did a survey with DOE of what young people wanted to do after school in our detention and placement sites. And actually many of them, besides asking for sports, were asking for more opportunities for credit recovery. They have an opportunity to get back into the time they have lost and get re-engaged, and they want to use it. I mean, we just need to figure it out as adults on how to create those opportunities.
So, sorry, just before you start, I just flipped to a slide since we were talking about placements. And to be clear, this is not our data. This is from Dr. Butts' report. and it shows the number of placements. This is the graph that shows the number of placements, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. There was some concern that with building these new placements, then there would be enthusiasm about putting more kids in them and that the placement system could grow. And Dr. Price's chart shows that that hasn't actually happened. And what also hasn't happened is that there was some concern that maybe judges wouldn't trust the non-secure placements, and so they would start putting more kids in the next step up, which is the limited secure placement. Also hasn't happened if you look at 2012 through 14. So go for it.
So asking about evaluation and assessment, whether this is working, of course, is a huge topic. The ultimate test would be data that we don't have. We hear a lot more now about body cameras on police officers. I'd love to have a body camera on every kid sent to placement to see how people talk to them when they're in placement. These are adolescents, and we send them to places, and we have this language that we use. In this room, we talk about therapeutic models, but I think when you're talking with an adolescent, as soon as you use the word therapy, you've lost ground. I wish we could change that language. There are other language that we use which makes it harder. We've gotten hooked on using this term risk. We do risk assessments, and this is a high-risk young person. I don't know why any judge or prosecutor would go along with a diversion agreement when the kid has been described as high risk. I wish we could call them like highly vulnerable to future law enforcement contact. Something that would imply there's a social dynamic in communities. We use these risk assessment tools, which by and large are based on variables which are controlled by the system. So we have the probability of arrest, we have the probability of placement, the probability of charge, the charge itself. We pile that all into a statistical model, and then we look, oh look, we can predict the future law enforcement contact and processing. Well, all we're doing is saying these are the young people that we like to arrest, that we will probably arrest in the future. And so I like Dr. Cahoman's description of, yes, life is unfair. How many teenagers say, well, that's not fair? I remember saying that. And to teach them, yes, life is unfair, and we are here to try to help you survive that, to function in an unfair society and to make your way. That makes a lot of sense to me. And that is at root of a lot of models that we call various kinds of therapy. But let's stop telling youth and families that they're in therapy. That's one of my suggestions. Call it something else. So whether the system's working or not, I would love to have that body camera to see what kind of faces they're looking at all day and what kind of sentences are being delivered to them and how condescending it could be and infantilizing and dependency forming. Instead of instinctively thinking that a young person that has contact with the police must be broken somehow, why don't we assume that they're in a situation that they need help to get out of, and let's build on their strengths. I know ACS is very interested in collecting more data on positive outcomes and success, as Commissioner Franco said. So if we could have more data on success, I think we'd be able to say more clearly and accurately whether close to home is working. Right now, all we can say is that after we've started shifting the pieces around on the game board, it didn't all go to hell. That was one of the worries, that, as we said here already, when we start closing down access to state facilities, judges will panic and start to overcommit, over-detain, increase the probability of placement. That doesn't seem to be happening, and that's a good thing. And you have to understand the other side of the bench. So my late father-in-law spent more than 30 years being a juvenile court judge in Michigan. And I remember having these conversations with him, and he would say to me, you don't understand what it's like for us. Like, I'm sitting on the bench, and I have this 13-year-old young woman in front of me who is running around with this 18-year-old boyfriend who is at risk, who's staying out all night, the family's freaked out, I have to do something, and ordering yet another community-based placement is not going to do it. I'm afraid for her safety and her life, I have to do something, and I know I have this placement setting, that I trust the people there, they do good work, I think she'll be safe. And you have to understand that impulse that all of us have. The downside of that is called child saving, where we start thinking about every kid like that, and oh, I have to save them all, I have to get them off the street, and that's how you blow up the system and create mass incarceration. So somehow there has to be check and balances to know whether we're using placement appropriately, and once we decide to use placement, what's it like for that young person and that family? Are we really building assets and strengths and reintegrating them back into the community, or are we just turning them into professional patients? And I don't know I don't know anyone that has that kind of data. New York has a lot of data problems that we need to work on, but we are far from being able to say this works.
Thank you.
I hate speaking right after Jeffrey. But I'm next in line, so I'll take it on. You know, it seems to me the first thing that jumped out at me when you asked the question, Abigail, was how do you define working, number one? And I suppose you can define it in a variety of ways, and then there's a lot of metrics that you can use to determine whether or not it works. And it's a new program, and I would imagine, well, I wouldn't have to imagine, I can just rely on what Jeffrey said, because he knows data obviously much better than I do, that, you know, a lot of that data is not out there yet. But I do think that we can begin to make some judgments about whether it's working. And I think coming from the perspective of the people that represent these kids in the system, I think it's safe to say that our feeling is, yeah, it's working. You know, has it shifted everything entirely? You know, have we sort of achieved nirvana here? Are we in the perfect place with regards to our kids and our kids that are coming through the system? No, not by a long shot. You know, I said before that we still place far too many kids. And, you know, Jeffrey made the point of what we really have, you know, more than a juvenile justice system, or maybe I'm just sort of changing his words a little bit, what we ought to have is a larger, perhaps, child welfare system or a child welfare approach to this population as opposed to a juvenile justice approach, because so many of our kids who come through the juvenile justice system are really child welfare kids and not, they're not young criminals. They're kids, and they're kids engaging in conduct and behavior that is not that atypical for adolescents. But, you know, back to the question, you know, is it working? I suppose, like, one metric, and I don't know the answer to this, but it'll be interesting to see over time, is does the percentage of kids that are being placed in close to home, is that decreasing at a faster rate than the number of kids that are coming into the system in the first place, right? Are we placing fewer kids? Not fewer kids just, you know, in terms of a gross number, but in relation to the number of kids that come through the front door. Do fewer of them get placed? Because that's obviously what our goal is. And my guess is that we're not doing a great job at that yet, but hopefully that'll continue. But some of the other, it seems to me, things that we can look at to determine whether or not we feel like this is working, as opposed to whether it works, is our experience, and this is fairly anecdotal, I don't have data for this, but our experience is that extensions of placement are down. It was routine when our kids were placed with OCFS Upstate. There was rarely a kid that got placed where there wasn't an application made for an extension of placement. We are seeing a decrease in the number of applications for extension of placement with kids who aren't close to home. Our experience is, just in the short time that close to home has been in place, that the number of arrests that are taking place at the facilities has gone down. As the facilities have begun to adjust and recognize and appreciate the population of kids that they're working with and what is and isn't normative behavior and what you can expect when you throw kids into this kind of an environment that they're not used to, there's a greater level of tolerance for some acting out behavior, and there is perhaps even less acting out behavior in the facilities. But the bottom line is the number of arrests that we've experienced of kids who have been placed close to home seems to have gone down. There's the intangible of kids are having more contact with their families. That has to be a good thing, right? You know, except for a small percentage of families. But for the most part, it's got to be a good thing that kids have an opportunity to have more contact and work more closely with their families, especially as they approach discharge, than they did if they were placed at some facility 200 miles from here upstate where they were rarely ever seeing their families at all, and there was nothing going on in the form of treatment or whatever, you know, more benign word that we can use to describe it, nothing going on to bring them together and prepare for that, for the child's re-entry. I don't know about recidivism rates. I don't know in this short period of time, you know, what that looks like. That would obviously be a metric that would be nice to be able to measure. There's, from our experience anecdotally, the kids that we represent, and this is huge to our kids, as I'm sure it is to all their parents, there's less abuse taking place of our kids. I mean, the stories, the nightmares, the horrible stories that we were hearing about kids in placement upstate at some of the facilities upstate, it was tragic. It was, you know, it would just make your skin crawl. And we're not hearing about that in the close-to-home facilities. That's great, especially if you're one of the kids that was being abused up there, or you're the family or parent of one of the kids whose child was being sent there for help and getting a phone call hearing about how your child's arm has been broken by staff or something of that nature. So I think that, I don't think it's too soon to say that there is a lot of positive stuff that's happening, and it does seem to be working. Whether it absolutely works, whether we've gotten where we hope to be, well, I think I can answer the question, no, we're not where we want to be. We're not where we hope close to home will take us. But we do seem to have taken some steps in the right direction. And I think compared to what has been in place, that in and of itself is huge.
Can I bring up one more thing? You mentioned the word recidivism, and that's another one of the problems we have with language and the way we talk about this thing, and I think we should try to free ourselves from this fixation about recidivism. Because recidivism really, it doesn't mean anything. It means re-engagement, new contact, and it's measured in lots of different ways. But it's a function of who's in your denominator. So if you have a program that serves a lot of really early age, lightweight kids, you're going to have a low recidivism rate. But why does that mean you're a better program? We should not be incentivizing programs to rebuff all the young people that really need a lot of help because that will increase their recidivism rate. In a good system where you're using placement only when absolutely necessary, your recidivism rate as a program should be really high. Because if you only are dealing with young people who need a lot of help and have a lot of past trauma, mental health problems, substance abuse, a lot of those issues, your recidivism rate should be high. And if you bring it down to 20%, there's something wrong, because that means you're probably creaming and taking lightweight kids. So I know it appeals to the simple-minded policy discussion to say what's the recidivism rate, but when you stack up programs with this metric about how many kids got rearrested after placement, you're just building in deception and all kinds of shenanigans that people do with their numbers. And I wish we instead could focus on how many of your kids are successfully employed, how many of your kids got their high school equivalency degree, how many of your kids have families, are parenting. It's a harder thing to measure, because one thing we can trust is we can get that recidivism data from the law enforcement system. We can use it, but to stack up programs with that number is just really inappropriate.
And you know, Jeff and the commissioner and I, not just on juvenile justice, but on the child welfare system, have been talking for a while now about well-being. Again, you know, keeping kids out of foster care is not enough. Keeping kids out of juvenile justice is not enough. I mean, in her mind, unless these young people actually are not homeless and they can go to college and do better. And that's what we want. I mean, even from a society perspective, we shouldn't be measuring just the cost that we have when they don't do well and go to a prison. We should be measuring the opportunity that we have lost when they don't make it into the workforce. And I think that's the way of thinking that we're trying to do. It's complicated. Interportability between systems is not easy. But I think that's the way we want to think, and we're actually beginning to do some MOUs around labor and education to figure out if we can measure that. Because at the end of the day, we want these kids to do well. I mean, they come from those neighborhoods, and if we could build them up, I mean, those neighborhoods will do better.
Thanks for coming. Thanks.
So I'm trying not to say something simple-minded because
like I just did.
so let's
Two
talk
people
about,
have called me simple-minded.
I think he called us all simple-minded. So let's look at the ultimate test of an evaluation. I think you heard a lot of the important pieces. I think Jeff is onto something about recidivism, but we should talk more about it because there needs to be some baseline that you hold yourself accountable to. I'd like to add four points to this, but the main point is first, we're not going to be successful with close to home if we think that this is the responsibility of ACS and the Commission of ACS. Being the Commission of ACS is probably the toughest job among commissioners. You know, think about child welfare. So if this is going to be successful, it's going to be a lot of other players. The commissioner will do everything she can, but we'll have to all come out and be advocates for the things that are really important here. So the first thing is, I'm sorry, child welfare is no better. The problem with child welfare and juvenile justice is we are a system of pathology. And this is not something that was always around. This is since the late 60s, early 70s, when the entire system moves from saying poor kids need to be helped to poor kids are mentally ill, which is utter nonsense. Unless you believe that being black or brown makes you mentally unhealthy. Because we have 20 years of good data on this, right? The incidence of mental health in Africa, in typical white communities, and now increasingly in the last 10 years, we've got data on the Asian community in the United States, goes from a low of about 12% to, in some crazy studies, a high of 24%. But so at best, maybe a quarter of our children in child welfare and juvenile justice have real mental health issues. So why are we talking so much about clinical work and therapy? Well, one reason is because all the big social work schools want to produce clinicians, and everyone wants to be a clinician. It's a step down from being a doctor, but it sounds good, right? So you're not a medical doctor, you're a clinician. But hey, look, if you want to believe in social, if you come to this conversation saying there's real social injustice that is creating our system, you can't also be on that platform and say, oh yeah, by the way, all our kids are sick. That's not true. All our kids are poor. Our kids may not have the kind of family support they need. Look at the New York Times article today about the millions of black men that are just invisible, right? Those things are real. That didn't happen in my life. My father wasn't the greatest guy, but he hung around, and it made a huge difference in my life. So we need to shift away from a system of pathology to a system of real health. That's number one. Two, let's never let juvenile justice become a jobs program again. It did. It became a jobs program, and that's not fair. You can't be committed to social justice and also say, well, but if my job depends on it, bring the kids in. One thing I always tell my board is we will be successful one day if we can get rid of some of the juvenile justice work we do. Now, of course, we've been around for 170 years. I don't know if that's going to happen in my lifetime, but at least you need to be aware that it can't be a jobs program. Three, coming back to this issue of community economics, right? The kids are coming from a few neighborhoods. These are not New York City kids. These are from a few neighborhoods, as small as 6, as large as 13. You can actually line these neighborhoods up by census tract data. It's that specific. It's not all of Queens. It's one census tract in Queens. And what we really need there is private enterprise and good schools. In the absence of good schools and private enterprise, I'm not optimistic at all that community demographics will change. And it doesn't need more government aid either. It doesn't, we're not a system, we're not a nation that's built on government aid. None of us are here because we think that we are somehow on a government life support system. That's not the idea. It's people want to be successful. Kids want to look forward to having a job, to being recognized for a job. So we need to create that system. In our programs, I think we need to talk about citizenship behavior, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what color you are. Normative behavior is normative behavior, right? So a lot of black kids succeed, not enough, but they do. A lot of brown kids succeed. Millions come to the United States from overseas, and they succeed because they have families, they have structures, they buy into a set of beliefs. My mother used to always tell me, only someone who cares about you will tell you the stuff you don't want to hear about yourself. She was absolutely right. I think we don't have enough people telling our kids, you can't do that. You can't do that and get away with it. And don't tell me it's because you're black, that you do something stupid, there are consequences. We'll stand by you, but we're not going to excuse you. Because kids need structure. I needed structure in my life at one time, and that was important, that I had people that loved me enough to give me structure. And the final thing is, if we are to evaluate this, it'll be over the next 10 to 20 years. There's no way for us to get a quick point-in-time evaluation. It's too early. I think we'll have to measure system dependence, because if our kids are leaving us, they're not getting arrested, but they're still, in a homeless shelter at some point, they're still unemployed, they're still on a welfare roll somewhere. We haven't changed the system at all. We've just migrated the problem from one place to another.
Thank you, Dr. DeCalma. So I want to open up the... Well, I do want to, sorry, we are past 10:30. I want to open up to audience questions as soon as possible, but I do not want to do that without getting to the question of oversight. So having talked to a number of people who are involved in this system, my understanding is at this point, ACS and the state agency, OCFS, are very involved with the day-to-day function of programs, seeing how they're working, following up on incident reports, making sure that goals are being met. There is, however, very little data that is required to be reported publicly, very little information that has to be released to the public. So I guess my question is, how do we make sure, once this administration is gone, if in the future there's a crime spike, if the system is not being run by people who are deeply committed to youth development as it is now, how do we make sure the abuses that happened at OCFS facilities in the past, that happened at Rikers, how do we make sure those don't happen in the future?
I mean, one thing that is essential, I mean, in a system to do better is like you kind of need to bring light to it. And it's one of the challenges that I had at OCFS. You know, you need a lot of people to get engaged. One of the things that we have an advantage being in New York City is that actually the attorneys come and meet with the kids in detention. They meet with the kids in the close to home sites. They have full access to their clients. They actually should be able to get access to all the information that they need whenever they need it. But I think we need to create a cadre of community leaders, actually particularly from those neighborhoods that you showed before, that are going to become stakeholders of the reform effort. We did it in the state before, and you know, if you remember our Brooklyn for Brooklyn project, they had a very robust advisory board of folks from Brooklyn who kind of took ownership of the Brooklyn kids. We are beginning to think with our provider community on how we develop that. I mean, many of our providers already have set of advisors that work with them in their homes, but I think we're going to expand on that. One of the commitments of the commission is to create more of a sense of an ownership of those community leaders, stakeholders, the faith-based community, and those folks who we want them to show up and be part of the culture of those sites. I mean, light and transparency is important. There's data that I think is available, and I will look more carefully into which one is available openly. We have the city council actually has been requesting data and hearings on the issue of close to home, and we try to be forthcoming with that. There's a set of metrics, there's a report that actually I'm working on that should be public within the next 3 weeks. We do every year. It's actually part of the mandate by OCFS, and it looks at issues of safety, movements, and so forth. There's a very robust, well-established oversight office under the state of New York with actually expertise in clinical and mental health and positive youth development that actually comes to the programs often. And looking at you in the audience, I mean, you have a significant number of staff of over 20 people that are consistently in the sites talking to the kids and the providers. There's an ombudsman office actually out of OCFS that actually they have full access to the kids and provide weekly reports on issues such as the quality of the food, to quality of the blankets, or anything else that the kid wants to express their voice. And we also are mandated by a set of federal standards. I mean, in non-secure placement, these kids are foster care placements. So we actually have to abide by many of the fostering connection standards. So, for example, movement is something that is not look well within the child welfare fostering connection federal standards. So that's why we want to make sure that doesn't happen. School continuity is very important, and we actually make sure that whenever possible we connect kids if the appropriate placement or school placement they were before. So we have plenty of layers of oversight. But I think the future, and under my commissioner, is to actually make sure that we really empower the folks in the community where our work is coming from.
And sorry, I can ask 2 quick questions about that. So with you mentioned the advisory board and building a really robust community of people from the neighborhoods kids are coming from to be looking at programs. My understanding is that the current advisory board has a non-disclosure agreement so that they're not allowed to talk publicly about their findings. What's the thinking around that? And if there's a more robust system, then does that change so that information becomes public? And then I also wanted to ask, you were talking about the layers of oversight with OCFS. How much of their findings are reported publicly or are required to be reported publicly?
I think OCFS actually does produce a report in response to our report, and I should know the specifics. I don't. In terms of the first question, I mean, what we're thinking about is different than our Juvenile Justice Oversight and Advisory Board, which is a body that reports directly to the commissioner and is actually working throughout the full continuum. The vision is actually one that Annie Casey has done well when they do the juvenile detention alternative sites work. It's actually having people from the community on, so it wouldn't be like a high-level, typical advocate, professional in a way, kind of reminded me of what Jerry was talking about. Those of us who actually live out of this work, the people who actually are in those communities where actually the kids are coming from, we need to develop that leadership. And I think it's not just about oversight, it's actually about sustainability. I mean, if we really want this impressive body of reduction in placements to continue, we need to give it back to the community, and that's the intent. We're just beginning to build that concept as we speak.
Thank you. So I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for audience questions. We have 2 mics at either side of the room. So I guess if you have questions, please line up at the mics.
Thank you. One of the smartest things, or one of the most eye-opening things I ever heard, was from a very la-di-da Park Avenue white lady who said to me, I don't know what poor people do when their teenagers become repulsive. I mean, they don't have boarding schools. And I think that there is, I mean, I think in every family there is a time when your teenager becomes impossible, and sometimes more than impossible, and sometimes violent, and sometimes hurting younger siblings or whatever, and you don't know how to handle it. Is there a place for something like the Close to Home program, not phrased as a criminal justice program, but phrased as a youth development effort, where you can have a break and your kids can have adults around them who are much better equipped to deal with their problems and normal problems as well as exacerbated problems? Is there a place for something like this for poorer people?
Parents? Anybody want to take that one?
No, and I don't think it's a good idea either. Look, I know boarding school is a great idea. I never went to one. I couldn't afford that for my own children. So, I think there are other ways to do this rather than taking you out of your home, especially when there's the implication of social injustice. There was a time when, and it's still in use, so-called PINS petition, person in need of supervision petition, was used, and parents used to tell me, oh, it's great. My son is at Children's Village. You have 220 acres here. I'm like, well, he's not with you. And so it's not solving the problem at all, long term. No, I agree. There are times, but I don't think it's the role of government to provide boarding schools to poor children. It just doesn't work out the way it works out for a wealthy private family. It just doesn't.
Hi, I'm Dawn Euster. I'm the School Justice Project Director at Advocates for Children, and I have a question about education. I'm wondering if you could talk, any of you, but particularly the providers, and I think Rianne is your name? Rianne. About the challenges that you see in terms of the provision of quality and appropriate education to students both within the non-secure placements at Close to Home and also when they're transitioning back into the community, as well as any recommendations you would make to improve that educational process.
Thank you.
I mean, I think that, I don't know if this is going to be entirely responsive to your question, and I think that you're interested especially in also hearing from Rianne about her own experience, educational experience in placement. I think that one of the areas in which, going back to one of the earlier questions about it working, is that from our experience, one of the things that's happening is that the kids who are being placed now at Close to Home are going to schools where they're getting credit. whereas when they were at OCFS, they very often weren't getting credit for the work that they do. So that there's a dramatic advantage there. I think that it's still an area that we have concerns in, representing the kids that are going there, as to the quality of the educational services there and the quality of the discharge planning and the transfer planning for kids going from placement, back into their home, back into their neighborhood schools. So I think that there's definitely some differences, but there are some real challenges that continue. What was your experience like, Priya?
Challenges that I had, education-wise, when I was at NSP, is they don't have. Oh, you can't hear me. They don't have enough teachers for every grade, so. Whether you're in middle school, throughout high school, we all take the same classes. So whatever problems, whatever you need help with in a particular class, it would be hard for you to get help with it because everybody's in the same class and everybody's in the same grade. Transitioning back to our neighborhood schools when we get discharged, we get the same credits. Like they get transferred back, but depending on how good you do in placement, coming towards the end, sometimes you could go to back to your neighborhood school while you're in placement. So it's not that bad of a transition.
So before we pass the mic, Rian, do you want to talk for a second just about what your credit situation looked like when you went in, and then what your credit situation looked like when you came out?
When I went in placement, I had no credits, and when I left placement, I had about 6 to 10 credits. I can't remember the correct number.
And you're tracked to graduate not only on time, but a little early.
Yes, next year.
I think Deanna's experience is a good example of what Close to Home can do well, which is a bit of forensics work to make sure that you accumulate the case record, find out where the gaps are, make sure that children don't fall below grade level while they're with us, and then transition them appropriately. What we find is about 20% of our young people come in, they've been on grade level, everything has been perfect, but about 80% of our kids come in, they've been transient, they've been moved between different systems, they've gone from one place to another, and each move represents a break in their education. And if you don't have someone that's really invested in putting that record back together, when the child leaves us, again, that move represents another break. So in our school, where it's a public school, we spend most of our time making sure that we put the record back together, and that the move from us, which is a discharge back to community, is not only managed, it's not always easy, because some of the public schools don't want our young people back, but we've had better success in recent years. But that the child is also transitioning with as complete a record as possible, with all the history attached there.
Well, for us, some of the challenges were that the kids were in the same classroom, but DOE did a better job this year of separating the middle school and the high schoolers. Also with credit recovery, a lot of our kids are working in the facilities online, to recover some of their credits. And also, we would love to see a 12-month school year. If DOE could design something like that, because that's one of the things we struggle with, that, if the kids are in placement for, 7 to 10 months or 12 months, some kids, and you only designed a school year from September to June, there goes the summer. So we would love to see changes in that.
Thanks. Thanks for raising the question.
Good morning. I'm going to frame my question in this because I heard it, but it's been danced around. Bill Johnson, who was on the U.S. ski team, constantly borrowed and stole cars till he was over the age of 18. The judge gave him a sentence: ski on the U.S. ski team or go to jail. That was his community service. A kid in New York responsibly borrows a train and drives it often, was treated like an adult, and basically thrown away instead of made a productive person of society. And I say that because I visited Holland. I saw 14-year-olds driving the tram as a work-study program. So here you have a kid that maybe makes keys and is using his mind, but being naughty and, you know, typical adolescence creative. He wants to drive trains. He wants a job, okay? But you throw him in jail. We saw figures here where ACS used, you know, the pie charts. But New York state law is basically based in gradual abolition slavery laws. That's family law. And we know the brutal system of slavery and breaking up families. When are we going to break this system? How about working, and some of you said some fine things, but basically the word for this is apartheid. It's racism, but it's apartheid. When are we going to get rid of this apartheid that's going on and get it straight to people who are, as you mentioned, with pink skin, that you violate these kids, they don't get a job, even though if they go through this system, because when they look you up on the computer, they find you've been incarcerated in some kind of way and busted, you don't get a job in Home Depot. You're going to pay for their welfare checks. You don't like paying welfare, you like voting Republicans in? How about take care of it in front? Stop making our schools look like penal institutions, which most of those neighborhoods have done under the billionaire prince of darkness, impact schools. These kids are stopped, frisked, and everything else every day in school. They're acclimated to prison. Okay? So how about doing something so that we can eradicate the system in front? And also, you said that the numbers were going down. I saw it at the age of 16. We all know that at the break of 16, something else happened. A lot of our kids are being treated like adults. 3 kids get on a plane and take a trip to Turkey, and they're treated like adults and called terrorists. You know, it's not like Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Thank you.
So just one quick response, and it's obviously not an answer to your broad question because there is no simple answer to it, but I do want to take advantage of the concerns that you raised to plug another initiative that unfortunately we haven't made much progress on, and that's raise the age. Because that's huge, and there's been a lot of talk about it. And in fact, the Chief Judge of the New York State Court of Appeals has been outspoken about it over the last couple of years. But thus far, the legislature hasn't seen fit to move forward on that. And I think that that addresses some of the concerns that you raise. You know, we're not raising the age to recognize that 16, like most of the rest of the country does, virtually 48 other states, that 16, 17-year-olds, and quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, even older, are kids. They're children still. They think like children, they act like children, but we still perceive them as predators, and we still treat them as predators under the penal law and prosecute them as adults. And I think that that goes to some of the underlying concerns that you raised that are implicit.
Selective enforcement of that also.
Yeah. When I worked for the Criminal Defense Division of the Legal Aid Society, and particularly during the Giuliani years, I'd work arraignments, and it was frightening and alarming the number of young black males that came through who were arrested and put through the system for riding a bike on the sidewalk. Okay, I rode the bike on my sidewalk in Park Slope on my way into the park. I never got stopped. You know, I never saw a delivery man who was riding the bike on the sidewalk, dropping off the fast food, come through the system, but I saw all kinds of young black males coming through the system for riding a bike on the sidewalk. 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, and I think that goes to, that's not happening as much from what I understand, but it's there, and I think that that goes to, you know, what's implicit in the concerns that you've raised.
Thank you. Let's go to the side.
Good morning. Dr. Cohenbaum, you had made 2 statements that I'd like to make a comment on that will lead to my question. The first one was you were speaking about survival. And yes, we all grow up and we learn survival skills. But I feel a lot of the young Black and Latino youth, especially in this city, their survival skills are whether or not they're going to eat that day, whether or not they have clothes and shoes on their back to get to school, whether or not they have supplies in their schools. So we definitely need to address that issue. Secondly, you had made a comment about a lot of the system change when it came to working with the lower class happened in the 60s and 70s. We also know in the 60s and 70s, a lot of the civil rights leaders and a lot of the powerful leaders working for Black and Latino youth were either silenced, incarcerated, or assassinated. So my question is, you talked about the front door earlier, but the front door really is in Albany. So to kind of back up what the gentleman was saying earlier, what are we doing to change the policies of a white patriarchal system that's been set up for over 200 years?
First, thank you for listening to me. You know, I don't know if the front door is in Albany. I think we're a great democracy, and when people come together, if we keep the issues directly in front of us, if we speak honestly, if we are willing to not be partisan in our approach, but to be really blunt where we need to be, and then to also build a consensus with people that don't agree with us, we can find progress. So I don't think Albany is the reason why we don't have progress. I don't think it's any longer a white and black issue. We're a very multicultural, especially here in the greater New York City area, right? We come from all backgrounds. I think what prevents us, really the big impediment, is the inability of our system, so leaders like you and me, those of us who work in the system, to speak with one voice and say, our kids are not broken, they're poor. Our kids are not mentally ill, they're poor. Our kids are not surviving and reaching adulthood and achieving citizenship because they don't have belonging, and half of our kids go to schools that have been failing for the last decade. If we can say that with one voice, I think we will begin to see improvement.
So, guys, it's 10:55. I think at some point this room like sinks into the earth. I'm wondering, so it looks like we've got two more questions over there. Maybe both of you could ask your questions in sequence, and then the panel can kind of respond to both, and then we can run out the door.
Good morning. My name is Kareem Chapman from Harlem, New York. For the past 6 years, I've worked with kids who are directly in gangs, either have been shot or may possibly do the shooting. My question to you is, what are you guys doing, or what steps are you making in reference to the grassroots organizations who are trying their best to intervene in the violence? In some cases, these kids may also end up in your facilities. So what are you guys doing in that regards?
Hi. My question was, what impact would Raise the Age make on close to home?
So I'm going to try to take the first one. We need to do more. I mean, I think we all who have been engaged in this work for a while remember, I think, Jeremy, you mentioned kind of a job program. You know, we knew that there was some economic perversity to the concept that we had, you know, a lot of job creation far, far away from New York City, based on New York City kids, and many of us saw the promise of close to home as an ability to actually invest in those communities. We haven't done enough of that, and my commissioner reminds me of that consistently. I think I mentioned early on a recent RFP for about $3 million that is actually based on community-based organizations within the 10 neighborhoods that actually account for the most of the placements in close to home, and child welfare is structured in a completely different way to the typical RFP that we do at ACS, where we actually are looking for cultural institutions and the non-therapeutic institutions that Jeffrey talked about to be funded to create the long-lasting support relationship for our kids. It's just a drop in the bucket, but we need to do more of that. And I think actually our providers are beginning to do a lot of those partnerships with those smaller agencies in the community. Raise the age, it depends on what formula they're going to take. I mean, you know, we have about 20 different algorithms of predictability of the impact of kids. It would be a significant number of kids. Folks who are thinking this through are trying to create as many exit ramps so that actually, you know, not the same amount or percentage of kids will be placed. And hopefully that actually goes through, but we don't know.
Well, I think it also, the difficulty in responding to the second question about the impact Raise the Age would have is that there are so many different versions floating around of Raise the Age right now. You know, there are people like myself who take what plays out to be a fairly extreme position, which is that, you know, at the very least, 18 and all 18-year-old and unders for all offenses should be treated in family court. That's where original jurisdiction belongs. You know, it's not, you're not a kid if you're a 17-year-old who does one thing, but you're not a kid if you are the same 17-year-old but you commit a different crime. It seems to me that there ought to be consistency. And I have no doubt that if raise the age included all 18-year-olds and under being prosecuted, for lack of a better term, as juveniles in family court, I'm sure that initially that would, the number of kids being placed in close to home would expand. It almost certainly would, in large part because I think that the system would be so concerned about the conduct of some of those kids, and without the community-based support being provided right away, there would be a fallback to placement. And you know, some people argue, well, you know, do we really want the 16 and 17-year-olds in family court? Because if they jump a turnstile, as an adult, they get an ACD and 1 day of community service, whereas if they go to family court, now family court's going to dig into their entire background, and that same kid might get placed. But you know what? If they're kids, then they deserve to be treated as kids in family court, regardless of whether or not, in some instances, the way the system exists right now, that might involve more intervention in their lives, especially because if we do raise the age properly, it doesn't have to involve more intervention in their lives, because their issues can be addressed the same way they are as adults right now, except they can come out of it without a record.
And I'd like to respond to Mr. Chapman's question, which is, I do think the solution, the pathway out of all these problems is to build strong neighborhood-based, local programs and to work with young people and help them to attach to school and work and everything else. The problem is that we only have a system, and I love the fact that you have that solicitation out, but we know what happens when you announce a lot of government money is available is the big established corporate social services providers grab it all up. So somehow we need to incubate small neighborhood-based programs and provide them with the support they need to compete in that environment, which means budgeting and evaluation results. That's a very hard thing to do, but if we don't do that, we're just replicating the problem and moving it from the public to the private sector.
Just to the first question, we definitely at Shelter in Arms work with grassroots groups. We bring them into the facilities and speak to our young people, and they come in quarterly to do workshops, you know, with our young people. So if you want to speak to me afterwards, okay.
Great. All right, well, I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank our really fantastic panel. This was a fun conversation.